BG Gallery, which is in Santa Monica near my studio, and I am Juri Koll from the Venice Institute of Contemporary Art. The owner and founder of the BG Gallery is Bleicher, who's sitting
Good evening.
Here.
Good afternoon.
So we have three guests, plus, well, more than three guests, but we have three guests we're going to talk to first, and then we're going to do some studio visits at the end with some artists who are going to show us some of their work. So the first, I'm going to go through the guests first, and then we'll start with the first guest. The first guest is Roan. He's a street artist and a photographer who often does portraits of the female face. They're gorgeous and very large and wonderful. The second guest will be Alec Graham from the Art Gallery New South Wales, who will share work by Brett Whitley and others. Whiteley, sorry.
All right.
And then we have Charles Justin from JAM, he calls it, but it's also known as the Justin Art House Museum. He's been doing some art travels of late, which he is starting to put on his website. And so it's interesting that I believe that's JAM. Yep, there's JAM. And we're going to be showing pictures of Australia as we go through the beginning of this discussion. Here we have Roan's, one of Roan's works. Roan, I saw the video of your portraits and of you doing the portraits. And one thing that's interesting is a couple of projects you've done, pardon me, where your images are painted on buildings that are about to be removed and replaced for other uses. And I really, really enjoyed watching the video of you doing that on some buildings that were part of a new project. And the reason I like them is because besides their beauty and they're all faces that are the jaws tilted up to the sky. People are looking upward or off into a distant place. But what I really found interesting is that you use an industrial spray machine to spray the paint, and it looked to me like you didn't do any cartoons. We call them cartoons when we do frescoes. So why don't you talk about your those murals, and then that can segue to whatever, to any other questions we might have.
He doesn't know that these are strange.
Yeah, I guess by cartoons you might mean a sketch of how I begin.
Yeah,
work.
something you put on the wall first. It looks like you're doing it freehand.
Yeah, I am doing it freehand. I cut this whole section out of my presentation because it's quite a long and involved technique that I developed. Everyone knows the idea of doing the grid technique, where you put the squares over the image you want to reference. After doing that on such a large scale, it's really impractical once you get over 2 or 3 stories. Because you need to have it like multiple cherry pickers and lines, and walls aren't actually level. So I developed this system where I just put all sorts of random markings across the whole wall, or if the wall has an interesting texture, that's enough. And I'll use the texture or the random markings as reference points.
Like for the edge of the
eye. Just take a photograph. Yeah, so
cool.
I can just take a photograph, overlay it, and then use that as my reference point. And then no longer do I need to ever step back and I'm confident in the technique, and I just know my proportions are going to be perfect because of it.
That's fantastic.
And I've shared this with a lot of other artists, and I just did something like this last week with a couple hundred teachers from Australia, trying to teach them how to do it so they can pass it on to their students as well.
Yeah, I think we could. I think I'd like to introduce some of my muralist friends in LA that technique, because when I saw you do it, I was like, that frees up a huge amount of time. Yeah,
it does.
And
so many mistakes are made because you start in the wrong square. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like it allows you to to do works quicker, but still just as accurate, which means that if you're working in buildings that might be torn down imminently, you have a chance to do
Yeah.
something in that space quickly.
Yeah,
Relatively
and
quickly.
yeah, it actually allows you to work on surfaces that aren't flat as well. So
Right.
you can take a photo of something and it can actually have like a step in the wall or be on a 45-degree angle in part of it. And you know where you're taking your photo from, it's going to look right from that perspective.
So do you, so tell us about what's going on with you right now. Are you in process of certain murals? Do you have more other subjects you want to tackle?
Everything's cancelled. So the last couple of years, my work's kind of moved into this immersive art realm where I build these quite over the top sets inside these buildings that people can come and visit and walk through, and they have like an entire soundscape and everything. But that is not quite possible in today's current climate. So all the programs I had lined up for this year have been, pushed back to next year. One thing I've survived on, and this is kind of funny, is jigsaw puzzles. I've started selling jigsaw puzzles of my artwork, and I did it like the moment we went into lockdown. I just started to offer them, and it's been like 8 months, and I'm still selling them. And like it's been one of those things where like I might sell 20 of them, and I've sold like over 1,000. I've literally made my income this year from jigsaw puzzles, and it's like I don't know how the hell that happened.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
So very quick pivot there.
Are those jigsaw puzzle? Well, I'm gonna have to check it out on your website. So
yeah, it's all on the website.
So well, thank you. I'm gonna move on quickly. We're gonna come back to you, Ron, if you're still here.
Sure.
But I'm gonna move quickly to Alex Graham at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and you're showing work by Brett Whiteley and other Australian artists. Tell us a little bit about your gallery, how long it's been in operation, and how you've dealt with the struggles of COVID.
And
Thanks, Juri.
Gallery New South Wales.
The Brett Whiteley studio is dedicated to the artist Brett Whiteley, who throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s made an international career for himself as a painter primarily. He was 22 years of age when he sold works to the Tate Gallery in London and was acquired into their collection. So very early on, he was showing with Bridget Riley and a number of major artists that were emerging in the 60s in London. He was represented by Marlborough Gallery that was showing Francis Bacon's works and became good friends with Francis Bacon. So had he stayed in Europe and America, he would have no doubt had an international career, but decided to come back to Australia and raise his family here. He had a young family at the time. And the studio itself in Surrey Hills in Sydney was his last studio and residence. It's a split level warehouse. It has a mezzanine with his purpose-built studio in it. So it's a museum, but it's also an art gallery. We have changing exhibitions of Brett Whiteley's own artworks, and we also have an annual scholarship prize, which is awarded to young Australian painters between the age of 20 and 30. And so we have a contemporary painter each year judge that award, and first prize is usually a trip to Paris for 3 months and 3 months to travel anywhere in Europe. We had to lock down with COVID as everybody else did. So we just sort of pivoted and did some much needed renovations at that time and refreshed our walls and repainted and reinforced a few walls that needed a bit of TLC. And then I had to cancel a show that we had planned with loans that were to come from interstate and reopen with a collection exhibition at that time. The studio is an extraordinary place. It's unique. There aren't too many artist studios in Australia. It's supported by the government. So we have some sponsorship. We have free admission because of JP Morgan sponsorship, which is fantastic. The Art Gallery of New South Wales is a state government institution. It's been around for over 150 plus years, and the studio's been running as a public museum since 1995 now. Brett Whiteley died in 92, and the family and the state government and the Art Gallery of New South Wales came to this arrangement. So we've been running since 95. It's been free for the last 15 years, which is as art gallery should be. And it's a public museum.
And so have you been involved with it in that whole length of time, or have you?
I started off, Juri, as a teacher lecturer at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. So we were teaching visiting students, secondary and tertiary students, about our own Indigenous collections, international artists, changing exhibitions, etc. And working at the Brett Whiteley studio, it's very much a deep dive. It's a specialist area, and you're looking at one artist's life, their themes, their works, etc. So I began after about 2 or 3 years at the Art Gallery of New South Wales teaching over at the Brett Whiteley studio, and I've stayed on and now manage the studio.
Oh, that's fantastic. How is, do we have images of Brett Whiteley's work, Laura?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Or you can show us if you have something nearby.
Well, each panelist will be giving us a little tour of images.
Like us to do that now?
Yeah, let's do it now.
Okay.
I'll get it up now. I think it's the way to do it. Let me see. Excuse me.
Ryan, there's
there it is. There. Can you see it?
Oh yeah, I see it. Yeah. And
Okay.
Ron, if you want to get some of your images ready for in a moment, that would be great. If you have some, or Laura will have some. Anyway, go
I
ahead.
was just
Go
going to
ahead.
ask him whether Whiteley was an influence, or any 20th century Aussie artists had been an influence on his work. It's a different tradition, but
yeah, it's strange. Like I really didn't have a lot of traditional art influence. Like I very much came from painting in the street and skateboarding background, and I've learned a lot about art recently, but it's like, yeah, growing up I was quite ignorant to stuff unless it was kind of pop culture. So
Sure.
like I know who Brett Whiteley is now, but it's like when I started I definitely didn't.
absolutely.
Yeah, so we're looking now at the Alex gallery, and some art by Brett.
Yeah.
Brett Whiteley, yeah, he's well, I'll let Alec take it from him.
Thanks, all.
Yeah.
Whiteley's very well known for these Lavender Bay works in Australia. He's far better known in Europe for his abstractions and early bathroom series, and quite beautiful figurative works that he was doing in his early 20s. When he comes back to Australia in the 70s, the Lavender Bay works become what he's renowned for in Australia. But he was a painter and a sculptor. This is the living room upstairs in the studio, and these are the studio doors that enter into his workspace, his creative workspace. So I just sort of wanted to sort of take you into the space physically. It's quite an intimate area. You go from a very public space downstairs to a domestic space into quite an intimate working space. All the works that you see on the walls will change with each exhibition. We'll refresh and restage the studio as it is with each show. So we have about 2 to 3 exhibitions a year. So I wanted just to show you the dynamic space rather than a static space that we have. It's a combination of preservation of what is Whiteley's works and ephemeral materials, books, paint materials, the graffiti on the wall, etc. But it's also a dynamic space for the exhibitions that we change and hold here. So
That's
this is our
very
current
interesting. So you're curating new artworks within the studio environment as though it's in situ in his studio. That's a very interesting way to do it.
This is quite a unique thing on that Brett Whiteley, in fact, designed the space that you can see now for his own exhibitions. and he lived upstairs from this. And so he was a very holistic artist, an incredibly professional and successful artist. And now he was in complete control in terms of lighting his own artworks, curating his own exhibition, providing an exhibition catalogue and selling works to an established collection of interested buyers in Brett Whiteley's own artworks. So this was the culmination of 30 years of art experience.
Yeah.
That's really unique. That's a unique way of doing it. I mean, although I've seen many artists have studios with exhibition locations within them. I've never heard of an artist devoting this amount of time to something this gorgeous in terms of ability to showcase their own work, which is really a mark of somebody who sounds to me like realized he needed to do it because of the remoteness. Well, it's not remote, but you know what I think you understand what I mean.
He was a big fish in a small pond if you're looking at the art world, Juri. But he started off as a pretty good fish swimming in a very large pond in Europe and America. He was in major collections by the time he was 26, 27 throughout Europe and America. It's extraordinary career he had. Had he stayed in Europe or America, he'd be as well known as David Hockney.
That doesn't surprise me. How long did he live? How?
He died at the age of 53.
Wow.
So that's the tragedy of his life. He was a heroin addict from his mid-30s. So for about 20 years of his life, the latter 20 years. And that's the tragedy of Brett Whiteley. We're very fortunate that his widow, Wendy Whiteley, is a great supporter of the Brett Whiteley studio. So she, in fact, curates the exhibitions with us. And we have a number of short films and videos on our website with Wendy talking about each exhibition. And there's audio tours that we have as guided tours that people can click onto when they come to the studio and listen to Wendy actually talking about the works, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to spend some time with this. This is pretty incredible. Thank you very much for that. And all the hard work you've been doing. The next person we're going to introduce is Charles Justin for JAM, which is otherwise known as the Justin Art House Museum. We talked earlier, and it's in Melbourne, Australia. And we also talked earlier about, go ahead, what were you going to say?
I know Roan has a 2:30. I'm just wondering.
Roan, let's see some of your works. Laura, can we put some of Roan's works up before we go to Justin?
I can.
Yeah, you can
probably
do
be like 15 minutes late. So go ahead.
Yeah, but
okay.
Okay, let's continue with Charles then. So Charles, tell us a little bit about how the Justin Art House Museum began, and tell us a little bit about your travels and the kind of work that you do at your museum.
Well, I'm an architect by profession, and I knew that I was retiring at 65 from my own practice, and so essentially the museum came about because we were art collectors as well as something to do in our third stage of our life. So my wife and I decided to go down that path. So we built the House Museum and jumped in the deep end and decided to share our love of art with the public.
And how long has it been open?
We opened in 2016.
And Laura, can you show the picture of the building again? And do we have some interiors of it?
Yes, Charles will be sharing some images.
Okay, great, Charles. Yeah, okay, great.
I think it's very interesting because quite often these private museums, they get an architect to design it, but you were an architect yourself, so.
Yeah, but I didn't design it, my daughter did.
Oh, you didn't?
Oh.
My daughter's an architect, and so I gave the project to her, and she did a much better job than I would have done.
Beautiful.
That's gorgeous.
So, so we're very interested in private museums, and in fact, the last 10 10 years we've been searching out private museums around the world when we travel, and one of the interesting things about private museums is that they are all unique. Each one is different, and that's what's so fascinating about them, because you see the personal sort of interest of the collector in the private museum, and so you see art that you don't normally see in sort of institutions, and so everything's different. The art's different, the way it's displayed, the way it's curated, the setting, the architecture. It's a total new experience, and that's why I thought it'd be worthwhile in my presentation today to talk about some of the private museums in Australia.
Absolutely.
Which are quite fascinating.
Have at it, and also show us some interiors of yours if you could as well.
Yeah, we've got all that.
Yeah, go ahead and tell us a little bit about what you wanted to talk about when it comes to private museums.
Well, I can do that. Do you want me to do my slideshow now, or?
Yeah, let's have a look. Let's do a trip around Australia's private museums.
Okay. All right. So
that's quite a unique opportunity.
Okay, so I'll start off with the big one. This is Mona, the Museum of Old and New Art. This is in Hobart in Tasmania, which is an island off the south of Melbourne, and was set up by this guy here called David Walsh. And David Walsh actually makes his money. He's made a fortune out of professional gambling. He's actually a mathematician and also a digital expert, and he's created all these programs which are no lose, and he's made a fortune. So he's also a great art collector. So he built this museum, and I think it was in 2004, and it's located on the Derwent River, in actually working class area where he grew up, and it's built on a winery, and so which he runs as well, and he's very eccentric and highly opinionated, and so the whole theme of the facility about two great focuses of his, which is sex and death, and you can see in some of the artworks here, it's actually the building was cut into the hill there. And they use mining equipment to cut out the sandstone to actually create the gallery space, and it's totally disruptive. He sort of broke every rule in the book with regard to putting together museums, and in some ways, going there is like a religious experience. It's like a pilgrimage, and you're going down into the subterranean temple, and you can see by the shots here. So he has both a sort of a very extensive antiquity collection and also a contemporary collection of Australian and international art. This work here is by Wim Voys, a Belgian artist, and this is called Clacker Professional. And essentially it is a device for converting food into waste, like the human digestive system, and at 2 o'clock every day it actually discharges the feces for everyone to see. And he also, and up here on the top here, you can see these are 153 vulvas, which are plaster casts of women vulvas, which have been put on the wall there, and each one of them is different, which is fascinating. They're like private museums. They're all unique, and you can see just by the atmosphere of the museum is just amazing. And he's also commissioned major artists like James Turrell and other international artists to install. So it is a total experience going to that place. And just an example, in the first 3 years, he had 4 million visitors. And I think he single-handedly has revolutionized the tourism industry in that state.
Wow, that sounds fantastic.
It's amazing. It is a real international destination. There's another one in Sydney, which is also amazing. This is called White Rabbit, and it was started by Judith Nielsen. And its distinction is that it's the most extensive collection of contemporary Chinese art in the world. She started collecting in 2000, so it's all art since 2000, and she's got about 2,500 works in her collection. and she has, I think, 2 or 3 exhibitions per year. And as you can see, there are major installations by major Chinese artists, many of which are very sort of critical of the government. And so she converted this Rolls-Royce depot into a sort of 4-level gallery. And it's amazing art. Every time we go to Sydney, we just make a pilgrimage to see it. And she also has a tea house where you can actually have refreshments.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, and this is one in Victoria, which is about an hour out of Melbourne in the Yarra Valley, which is our wine country. Australia is very famous for its wine. So not only can you experience art here, but you can also have lunch and wine tastings. So this is set up by Mark and Eva Beeson, and they started collecting Australian. So their collection is all Australian. Started collecting from the mid-50s, and they set up this museum, private museum, and so they have exhibitions from their own collection, but also from curated exhibitions from art from outside. They have a Triennale, and they also have major installations in the grounds of the property there, and that is also an amazing destination as well. This one is similar to us. This is a house museum, also by an architect. So Melbourne's got the distinction of having 2 house museums, each by architects, by Corbett Line, and this is called the Line House Museum. So it's in 2 parts. The 4 slides on the left are actually the house. So he has tours of his home, which he conducts personally with himself and by his wife. And this was actually the inspiration for us to set up JAM.
So you live at JAM. It's your
we live there. A house museum is a sort of quite a rarefied version of a private museum where the collector actually lives in the museum. Wow. And so the museum has both a private and public function. And that's one of the things that Corbett is doing here, exploring the sort of dichotomy between what's private and what's public. And in his case, it's all integrated. But then he went one step further. So in the property next door, he actually built a fully fledged art gallery museum, which he calls the House Museum Galleries. And he's got a huge space in there, which he actually has exhibitions open to the public, and people can just walk in off the street and buy a ticket and see that. Whereas with the House Museum, you actually have to book for a small group tour, which leads us to JAM. So I'll just show you this video. With JAM, the focus of JAM was that we wanted to actually provide our visitors a very personal, intimate experience. So we have small groups. So we're into what's called slow art. So we don't have big exhibitions, and we spend a lot of time. So each of our tours lasts about 2 hours. And we provide refreshments, and we also run the tours in an interactive way. So we engage our audience to actually interrogate the art. And because what we find is that a lot of people are intimidated by contemporary art, and we want to sort of demystify it. And we have what we sort of like to call like salons or soirees, where people come and see the art, have a discussion, be intellectually stimulated, have some food and a drink, and have a chat to each other. We also have architecture taught by some of Australia's top architects who I know, and what we found is there's a real hunger from the public. Many of the people who visit us are not art people in the sense that they are collectors, they're just people who are interested in art. And so what we talk about is actually providing an experience rather than actually exhibitions. As part of our project, we actually commissioned 3 artists to actually produce work which was actually integrated into the building. So we've got the striped panel to the walls of our gallery by an artist called Tony Krause. The lift, we appointed an artist called Paul Snell to do this digitized panel to go in the lift. But the biggest commission was this stair, which has got 39 steps. And that's interactive. Actually, when you walk up the stairs, every time you trip a sensor, it actually changes the lighting combination, as you would have seen in the video. And the other thing we did is we're big fans of Yves Klein blue. So we've got large slabs of walls painted in Yves Klein blue, which is a sort of a theme throughout our museum. So we have two spaces. We've got the public areas, which we've got a gallery space here, and we also have our apartment. So we're over 3 levels. And with the gallery space, we actually change it. We're like Mona. We believe we're not into the white box. We're into what we call the theatrical experience. So in this particular case, this exhibition was called Black and White and Red All Over, which I hope you know is the newspaper joke. And so we had all the black and white works from our collection against this blood red wall. And we also had sub-themes. So the theme about this was how we live in a black and white world and how the world is becoming polarized. So there's both a political and also an artistic sort of underpinning to what we're looking at. And this is our apartment. So we change our apartment every time we change an exhibition. So every time people come to our place, they get a total new experience. Now, these works are from our collection, and this is the actual collection that we have on our walls at the moment. One of the things that we are committed to is actually unlocking private collections. So we've had, this is our second exhibition for another private collector. And they've got actually a museum quality collection, 2/3 of which is Indigenous art. And you can see some of the examples here of Indigenous art. And one of the things we want to explore here is the idea that there is no differentiation between what's Indigenous and what's Western style art. They're really part of the same movement. And so we've commissioned a writer to write an essay about that. But this has been postponed. So we'll be living with somebody else's top class collection for 2 years, which is quite a bonus, I think, for us. And so we have a lot of fun. Wow. And these are some of the artworks from our own collection. So our collection is essentially non-representational. We're big into abstract art, both hard-edged and sort of expressionist art. We're also big collectors of digital art and videos, and most of it's Australian. And we mainly collect emerging artists. So we don't spend a lot of money on our art. Some of the artists are really well known, like Daniel Crooks is an internationally renowned video artist, and Stephen Bram is collected in all the major museums. But most of our art is actually from young artists who are still either at school or just emerging. And that's the other thing we're trying to do with our visitors, trying to give them the confidence to buy art. And it doesn't have to be a named artist because they can actually acquire art as a very cost-effective way and surround themselves with fantastic art and bring joy to their life, which is a lot cheaper than buying a handbag for $15,000.
That's pretty
beautiful.
Fantastic. That is a pretty awesome presentation, Charles. My eyes have been opened, and I really appreciate it. I'd like to go back to Roan if you're still there, and show some of Roan's work.
You know, Charles, it's really the immersive experience of art museums. You know, it's done in a very interesting, immersive way, which kind of ties into Roan's immersive experiences nicely as well.
Yeah. Without a doubt, I think
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why we ended the slideshow with the Jam experience, because what we're promoting is the experience, and it's the totality. It's not only the art itself, it's actually the experience of being there. It's also the architecture, it's the design, it's the food, it's the discussion, it's the immersion in the idea of art. Because we're big believers that art is about ideas, and it's not about an object sitting on a wall. And therefore, there's quite a bit of commonality between what Roan is doing, because again, he's using art as part of a total experience, and so it's very much what we're into as well.
And I think
that's where art's going anyway.
I think you can make the case that Alec over at the Art Gallery New South Wales is doing an immersive experience too.
Yeah.
But now,
Yeah.
now we're here at with Roan's work. Roan, talk us through it.
Yeah. Myself now, like I've gained a huge following in the last few years for doing these immersive experiences, as I've been just talking about, where people can come into these buildings or installations that I've built up and walk through them. And like for me, well, the almost irony of it that people are so keen to come and see them, because everyone that I've done has been destroyed afterwards. So that limited amount of time has kind of made it very exclusive. And like I sold tickets for the last event quite cheap, but they all sold out. And then it became like almost a commodity of the ticket became such a valuable thing. And yeah, it's kind of been interesting.
Are you
playing on
saying
those
there
lines.
was a resale of the tickets themselves? People were selling the actual tickets afterwards?
People were trying, and we had to work out ways that people could sell them but not profit on it. And people kind of
I see.
would call
Like
anyone out. It's like, you can't do this. This is extortionary, blah, blah, blah. Because they're only $15 a ticket. And there was none left for like 6 weeks of the show. And still now people are disappointed they didn't get in to the last exhibition. But I learned a lot of lessons doing such an exhibition like this. Like my staff costs were astronomical, and it was actually just a zero-sum game to run it. So lots of lessons I've learned for the next one. But the whole idea of doing something that is only there temporary comes from street art and my background. And we do these things, and it's only going to be there for the moment, and you put all your effort into it, and you have to make sure you take a photograph of it, because the next day it may be painted over. And for me, like that's what's exciting about street art. I was gonna.
So this is actually
level, you're finding sort of places that are about to be knocked down or abandoned places, and doing an experience in them.
Yeah, so this place pictured here, I've got some photos further, but it was an old giant like Art Deco hotel, and it hadn't been used for 20 years. And the owner basically offered it to me to do something with it. I actually put it into a lot worse state than it looked. So a lot of the mold and rot and stuff like that it's all fake. It's actually in a lot better condition than it looks. So I've had buildings offered to me. It's like, I can't actually get public to walk through here because it's too hazardous. So it's a lot easier for me to make something look more, dilapidated than it really is. Because now part of the whole game I'm doing is the logistics of getting people through an experience. I'd quickly just touch on Melbourne. Like the street art scene in Melbourne is like, I think it's literally like one of the biggest pillars of Victorian tourism. And big attraction is there's quite a few laneways in Melbourne, and this is the key one, Hosier Lane. And it looks like this pretty much every single day, full of tourists, and pretty much anyone can pick up a paint can and paint there. For a lot of established artists like myself who've come from this background, like we no longer like to paint there, because you paint something and it's gone by the afternoon, and you literally have swarms of people around you, and it's not a great experience. And the people who paint there now are often tourists. Like if I flew into another city and I knew I could paint in a lane in Paris, I'd probably go do that. But for locals, it's kind of it's been and gone. And this photo is the same laneway from the year 2002, maybe, when we first started painting there. It wasn't allowed at all, and everything would just get painted over every week or so.
If you come to Venice, California sometime, we have a wall called the the graffiti art wall that is pretty large, and most of the well-known graffiti artists around here have agreed to leave every decent painting up for a week. Because as you know, the graffiti code is if you can't paint something better than what's already there, don't do it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. This is old Melbourne. Like, this is where it really boomed in the early 2000s, and this is what street art looked like here. But it's since grown into the muralism culture, as a lot of people call it, that you see now. I was part of a group called the Everfresh Crew, and we kind of were the first in this area to kind of step away from the traditional letter form graffiti and start doing more street art, but doing it on a scale that was probably competing with more of the graffiti artists.
Right.
That kind of melded into the muralism, and these are some other artists that are friends of mine, and they've started, they've been painting as long as I have and gone on to do some really amazing, successful things within Australia and internationally. Adnate just has an entire hotel in Perth actually now, literally named the Adnate Hotel. So it's really amazing to see such giant commercial ventures be so accepting of street art in Australia, which has been really interesting as well. There's other artists like Callum Preston, who I work with a lot, who've done other things. Like, he comes from a street art background, but he's been doing these installations where he'll build everything out of wood, like all those cereal boxes and stuff are just wood and hand painted, and even down to the magazine covers in this milk bar. And this was presented inside a gallery that people could go in there and you could buy the items individually.
Oh, cool.
There's another artist, Mysterious Owl, who's actually from the UK, but has lived here for a decade and has been painting since the early 2000s as well. But I've worked with him a lot, helping him find empty buildings. And the photograph on the right is actually from an abandoned fishing tackle shop that a developer offered to me, and he was looking for a space to hold an exhibition. And this is how he transformed it. Like, got in some really good lighting, painted everything black. And if you went in there 3 months before, it was like a fishing and bait shop. And you made it look like this. And it's like, there's quite a few artists in Melbourne, kind of just the galleries that offer us opportunities are often artist-run galleries, and they just don't really have much more to offer that we could possibly do ourselves. So for myself, that's kind of where the path I've gone down, where it's like I've just run my own exhibitions, and now become at a stage where when galleries come to me and they say, "Oh, we'd like to represent you," which is such a flattering offer, and all they can do is say they'll take 50, 60% of the wall price of any works that are sold. But I've kind of built my business model based on putting 50, 60% into the installation of the work, based on what I think I could sell. And there's no gallery that would put that amount of money into an installation for me. So I've kind of just done that on my own there. Well, it's more. Ian Strange is from a street art background. He used to be called Kid Zoom, and he's been doing some incredible work. And he worked with the other house museum, Lion Museum, recently. Did an installation there. But he's done these kind of takeovers of houses and presented them as photography. He did a great series in New Zealand in Christchurch after the earthquake. He spent months there painting and cutting giant holes in some of these houses, and that was quite a amazing series he did. But interesting that he comes from the same kind of school as myself in a way, and he's also been like an inspiration. Now he's actually working at the Art Gallery of WA, helping do some art direction there. I don't know if it's a temporary role or he's going to be there for a while now because all of his projects have been pushed back as well.
Well, this
Yeah.
this is yours again, or it's another?
This is my artwork. This is probably from almost 8-9 years ago. Canvas work. So when I first kind of transitioned from trying to take my work from the street onto canvas, this is what it looked like. Kind of, you know, pulling in bill posters and textures and noise from the street. And it's always been like that troubling thing, like how do you put street art into a gallery? That, you know, it's like it's something that's always challenged me, and that's where I've come into this immersive space, because street art is an experience. Like that's what makes it interesting, because of the context. So my recent works where I'm actually just selling photographs of my works in the context and environment that I want them to be in, rather than trying to sell the canvas.
Yeah, I think you know, I think what we have somehow we've constructed. Oh, these are wonderful.
Yeah.
These are the ones that I was referring to at the beginning, or at least, you know, this kind of stuff. There's an artist by the name of John Devola who was doing things like this, and in the 70s, but nothing like what you're doing, but the feeling of being both inside and outside at the same time.
Yeah.
Is a wonderful thing. I'd like to move on, and Ron, thank you very much for this.
No worries.
Thing. I think what we've done here is we've discovered something, at least I have, about Australian, the proclivities of the Australian art world in terms of experience, which I think is going on around the world, of course, and even more so now. We were going to do some studio visits, right, Om? Om?
You're muted.
I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
There you go. So we're going to do some studio visits. Where are we?
Yeah, but I want to explore a little bit we can discuss any similarities we've seen here. And what I'm seeing a lot of is pushing the modalities a lot. Like with Roan, there's it's a painting, but it's an installation, but it's street art at the same time. Alec has a public museum that's also artist studio foundation. The artist himself, Brett Whiteley, combined a lot of things in a very cohesive way within his paintings, but also had a cheers, Ryan. Thanks for staying.
Ron. Thanks, man. Very nice to get to know you a little bit.
To have that studio above a museum like that just shows, you know, a lot of kind of left and right brain crossover in a lot of the things I'm seeing. And then Charles's museum, that you have steps that you walk up and they interact with you, and it's an experience. I've never seen that. A lot of the private museums seem to be extensions of the collector's personality, which is the space themselves seen that way. Whereas a lot of the private museums I've seen here, it's more white box, and the art is the collector's personality, but not as much as what I saw there. So that was exciting.
Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, my eyes are opened in terms of this immersive feeling, and it's it you know, it reminds me of why certain museums have always been so attractive to me, especially the smaller ones. If you like in Paris, some of the very smallest museums that are converted from homes and stuff like that. Those are the ones that, you know, like I forget the German name for it, but they were back in, hundreds of years ago, they were basically a studiola. In the Italian word is studiola, where you built your studio in your palazzo to house all the things you collected and brought your friends over to show them how cool it was. That's really what's exciting about seeing what you guys are doing, because it has that element of the ability to put things on the wall and juxtapose things that aren't necessarily always put together, so that you can see more about the work, because you've got so much difference between what you're putting next to each other. And that's part of that. And also just being able to see what someone likes to keep around, and the atmosphere they like to provide for people who visit them. And that's really cool. Yes, Alec.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to share the idea that with the studio museum as it is today, we're limited with it being in a residential area and passing traffic. It's not a tourist-built purpose museum. It's actually in a residential area where Whiteley lived. And so for that intimacy and that scale, it's about the quality of the experience over the volume of traffic or people coming to visit us. And so there's a lovely balance of having the intimacy of people being able to sit with works quietly and enjoy that experience, combining that with other public programs. We do drawing classes or other things here. But then because we're a satellite of the Art Gallery of New South Wales, we can take works on the road and take them to regional venues and promote Whiteley's works. And incidentally, the studio exists if you visit Sydney. And it's a way of creating new audiences over a longer period of time. And I think that's another thing that studios have to offer, or studio museums have to offer, is it's an intimate experience. It's a personal journey.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So how are we doing these studio visits? Is Laura?
Yeah, well, so what we'll do is we have a selection of, it's a virtual tour. So as you go and travel to a country, you might get the opportunity to pop into some local artist studios. So I'll get, Laura's got a collection of all the works up, and we'll look at that and then call upon the artists and pop into their studio if they happen to be on. Are you able to bring it up, Laura? Okay. So this first guy, Jordan, is a, do you mind paging down a little, Laura? Okay, just slowly roll down and I'll, okay. Is Josh Rosenthal on at all? Okay. Laura, what I'll get you to do is just click on each image and we'll make it bigger, and I'll just say a little something about the artist, and then we'll call upon them if they're here. So Jordan Azun is a Brisbane artist. These are actually encaustic. He has a solo show tomorrow, so he couldn't be on here. But they're encaustic, and those holes are like dug into the painting. So you see lots of layers of the encaustic, which is cool. So we'll just move to the next artist now. It's another Jordan piece. Tom, you're on, I think. Can we pop into your studio?
Yeah, actually, guys, I don't have a studio at the moment because I'm house sitting down in LA.
No worries. Yeah, just tell us a bit about this this interesting work here.
Sure. So first, I wanted to say I've been to the Brett Whiteley Gallery. I'm from Melbourne, but I used to go up to Sydney a bit, and it's an incredible place. And yeah, what Alec was saying about the intimacy of the place, I just want to say, the bit where you're looking at the doors, the two doors with all the pictures on it. It has pictures of Bob Dylan and all this stuff. And it really stayed with me, spending time in that space and seeing the stuff that Brett had on his walls. I'm a big fan of his, and and I want to go to Charles's museum as well. I haven't been to Australia for a bit, but next time I definitely will. And I don't have I'm doing a school I'm doing an MFA up at Santa Barbara, University of California, but they've just closed the studios because of COVID. So I came back down to LA for a while.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. So this painting here, I do a lot of, there's sort of free form kind of improvised figurative paintings. And they're all from a series called Floating Downstream. And they're very much about, this one kind of literally references a sort of downstream experience. But there's a lot of figures. It sort of borrows its name from the John Lennon lyrics about referencing coming up on an acid trip. So I'm into sort of psychedelia and
Cool.
kind of implied narrative works. Yeah.
I can see a bit of Arthur Boyd in there maybe too, or
Hey,
James Gleason, or
you've done your homework.
Aussie artists.
Yeah, I'll take
No,
that.
just by looking at it, I was seeing that.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. No, I definitely grew up on that stuff. Like I went to school. I went to VCA in Melbourne, and I did a year of honours at Monash as well. And I sort of grew up when I was at art school. I had to, my sort of mentor and a teacher that really affected me was Steve Cox, an Australian painter who remains a good friend. And I sort of benefited from, there's a sort of school of Australian painting with like Gareth Sansom and the people he taught. So I used to have a studio with Peter Walsh in Melbourne and some of those. Yeah, that's kind of an older painting there. Did you have that other one that was on the wall earlier? Because there's one I wanted to talk about.
Laura, do you mind cutting back to that grouping we had?
Yeah, that very first page, if you have it, because there's one that specifically references Australia I was going to mention. I think you. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, this one. I wanted to talk about this one because this is people from Australia will remember the show Mr. Squiggle.
There he is in the bottom right.
Yeah. So Mr. Squiggle was a children's show when I was growing up in Australia, where children would send in pictures of squiggles, and Mr. Squiggle was a puppet. He had a pencil for a nose, and he was from outer space. He'd come down in a rocket. Jane would hold his hand, and he would draw on the squiggles and turn them into a sort of picture, usually upside down. He had a grumpy chalk backboard that he would use, and I was I did this one recently, and I was painting because, like I said, the works are very improvised and sort of figuring out content as I go along, and obviously introducing content as I feel it relates to it. But I was really thinking about how formative Mr. Squiggle was for me, watching that as a kid, and how it's kind of not dissimilar to how I work. So it's a bit of a homage to Mr. Squiggle. It was like and we had an ABC in Australia, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and yeah, we sort of grew up on. It was a good show. Yeah, I rewatched some on YouTube recently, and it holds up. It's a good show.
That's good. Ties into the Aussie theme tonight too. That's bringing back memories. He draws, if you guys can see, I don't know if anyone, but he has a pencil for his nose, and he draws, and people interpret it.
Yeah,
that's great.
It was only as an adult when I rewatched it on YouTube that I realized that, the puppeteer is above it, holding, because he's got a very pointy hat, and the puppeteer is holding the hat and drawing from up top. So yeah.
All right, let's switch back and pop into
very psychedelic. Very psychedelic.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
I mean,
Laura, do you mind popping back to the main screen?
Yeah.
And Tara, Tara is on, so we'll maybe pop in on Tara.
There
Hi,
she
guys.
is. There she is on the right. Yeah. So Tara's
You
in
in?
the studio, right?
Yeah, let's pop over to Tara's studio. Or
Hi, guys.
hey,
Thanks for visiting. I'd like to begin by doing something we do in Australia, which is acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. And where I am in the Bay Area, it's the Ohlone people. I was born in Ireland and grew up in Australia, and now I'm living in the US in the Bay Area. And I'm going to have a home in Santa Monica, so I'm thrilled about that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Close by.
Yeah. I came and visited your gallery a few weeks ago. I love the show that you have on up at the moment.
thank you.
So I started my art career in New York, and I also ran an experimental exhibition space there and worked as a curator for No Longer Empty and also worked at the Chelsea Art Museum. And currently I'm the director of the Augusta Savage Fellowship, and we provide subsidised studio space to people identifying as Black, Indigenous and artists of colour. So that's what I've been working on whilst in COVID, and also working in my studio when I can. But it was closed for a lot of the time too, and it's in this very strange old school, and it was kind of a bit like the zombie apocalypse for a while. It was very strange.
Are you talking about the Bay Area now?
Yeah.
What part?
So I'm at a place called Cubberley in Palo Alto. It's a studio program run by the city, and it's they provide subsidized studio space to artists, and we get juried in, and we're here for 4 years or 8 years, depending on how much kind of community work you do.
That's pretty great.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Can you show us around your studio, or you're on
Sure.
your?
Yeah, totally. My current series, I'm dealing with issues of environmental justice, and specifically the use of single-use plastic. And I try and elevate plastic as a medium. So here we have, here, let me turn my screen around actually. So this is single-use plastic wrapped around some lights, and I'm trying to have a zero waste studio, so I'm sequestering plastic into my works too. And this one here, this represents these concrete forms. Here, I'll show you this one first. These concrete forms, I put styrofoam in them, and I collect this from my neighbours and on next door, and the soft plastics as well. And these little interventions I do with my community help them think about their waste and their decisions about the things that they purchase too. So this is my first sculptural series. Previously, I've worked in photography, collage, and video.
Those are cool.
It's very interesting. It's fantastic.
They're cool. They're like a little bit of James Turrell and a little bit of George Herms.
Right, and also some Dan Flavin thrown in there too.
That's what I meant. Yeah, the earlier guy. Yeah, yeah.
And this piece here, this represents a core sample, and it's kind of the story of the Earth represented by core samples. And so you see the various geological striations, and then we get to the current era, which I'm calling the Plasticine. And this is, I collect these with the Surf Rider Foundation on the beaches, and I put them into my works. And then these have all sorts of plastics that I collect, and I call it sort of like sequestering. Oh, Maya.
So So how do you, that's something that is really interesting to me, is the collection of disparate materials and how you make them stick together.
Yeah.
Which is
So I
really-
start
which is
out,
kind of
I
a-
start out with this stuff. So my screen's going nuts. And then I wrap it around. I wrap it around these light tubes, and then I just kind of do a little bit of magic to make it look nice. But yeah, it's all very much trial and error, which is kind of the fun part, especially because my career didn't start out as a sculptor, so it's very much just kind of making it up as I go along. And that's the fun thing, to come into the studio and see what's transpired, because I start out off with the cement pieces. They start off with the formwork, and then you don't really know what's going to happen with them, and then they end up having these amazing textures.
Very, very cool.
Absolutely.
Very cool.
And then this is I got my 8-year-old neighbor to make me this origami box, which I then kind of crushed and made into this light fixture. So I'm just kind of playing around with lots of, and this was just some paper that another artist left in the studio. So I find the material and then I work out what to do with it. So that's kind of the fun part of that.
So it's a lot of scavenging.
Yeah, there's a lot of scavenging, but it's a lot of, recycled art can kind of look like trash. So I'm trying to make it look as elegant as it possibly can, while still, retaining some of its initial charm.
Yeah, the theme through a lot of this stuff seems to be recurring in terms of the core sample aspect of it, and the building the layers according to what came before and what came after, and sometimes it all comes at the same time. But the element of time in the element of time and compression of time in the pieces is really, really nice. And of course they have because the tall skinny ones have a feel of like totem feels to them, a little bit of a totem feel. So you're definitely addressing temporal ideas, very much so, in the work.
And I think just using minimalist forms, because I feel like it's, to me, this is all new, and I love those minimalist sculptures anyway. Like, I've been out to Martha and seen the works of Donald Judd and Dan Flavin, and I think it's a really nice place to start from, because the material that I'm using is so busy and crazy that to kind of like bring it down to something that's so minimal is kind of important, at least in this stage of my development anyway.
Very, very cool. Very cool.
Excellent. Laura, just put on the last couple of images there, and we'll see if Josh is on, but I don't think he is, and then we can just have a open discussion for a little bit, a couple of questions,
Alec,
and then...
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Alec. Alec had something he wanted to say.
Yes, yeah. I'm sorry, I have to leave, but I just wanted to thank you very much for the opportunity, and it's been fascinating to see all the artists, Tara and Tom and two others, and Charles in Melbourne, get safe, and can't wait to get down there and have a look at the museum that you have. Yuri and Om, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
It's so
Absolutely
much
pleasure. Honored to have you in, and appreciate it.
I can't wait to come see the work.
Please do.
Great. So, yeah, I'll just get big on those Josh Rosenthal for a second, just to have another taste of Australian art. and you can see a bit of Brett Whiteley and his work for sure. And a touch of Francis Bacon too. So it was interesting to hear that those two were good friends.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, this is what the fun part of this process is in doing these art world shows, is that you find connections that you didn't know about. You know, you just, it's just fascinating to see where people come from and where they go, and no matter what country you live in, you tend to be, no matter what country you live in, you tend to believe that your world is the only world sometimes. And this is what's great about this series, is that it allows us to open our minds a little bit and look beyond
Absolutely.
our own environments and get immersed in other people's environments.
Absolutely, yeah. Each country we've been to has had a slightly different flavor to it, and definitely seeing things. It makes you wonder, if certain artists had become part of the world canon, how the mainstream art world might have evolved differently. So yeah, it's been fascinating to see.
Yeah. So, are we? I mean, I know we've been running a little over, but should we open it up to some questions?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, just have open discussion amongst ourselves and any guests that are still on.
By the way, Tom, I really questions. Yeah, sorry, I'm interrupting. I apologize. I'm excited about it. Tom, I really like your work.
Yeah.
Tom Dunn, your work is great.
He may not be on.
I'm looking at him, but he's not.
Oh, maybe he's on
I don't know if he heard me, but I really like your work. Anyway, anybody have any questions?
Sorry, I just lost connection there for a second. Did I miss?
I was just complimenting on you on your work.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm sorry. As soon as it went from that screen share to this, I lost connection for a second. So sorry about that. Thank you. That's nice.
No, I really like. The first thing I'm gonna do after we're done with this is I'm gonna go look at Mr. Squiggle, and I'm gonna.
You got it. Yeah.
I'm gonna study your work, because the idea of having a puppeteer control something that's based on a squiggle that somebody sent in is really a great
it's as classic as like Pee Wee Herman in terms of like artistic kids show.
I think that's a great comparison actually for Australia. It's like I like that. And also a little bit of Ziggy Stardust in there, I think, with Mr. Squiggle. I always found anyway.
Yeah, we had HR Puffin stuff, which was kind of like our version of psychedelia during the 70s.
Oh yeah.
It was the guys who made it were clearly under the influence, and that was really what was wonderful about it, because it was sanctioned by a major. And anytime you do an animation, anybody at Disney or anybody at Warner Brothers or any of the other Hanna-Barbera, whatever, any of the animation studios knows that animators are a crazy bunch. They're about squiggles big time.
I should have mentioned too, since this is going to be on YouTube, if you go to artworldtravelguide.com, there will be a list of all the panelists and a link to seeing the artwork from the studios as well.
Yeah, and as far as the BG Gallery has always been one of my favorites for years and years and years. I've shown there a bunch of times, thankfully, and Om and I have been collaborating for quite a number of years and bringing art from other countries and doing stuff. And I'm really proud to be a part of this project, this Art World project. And if you want to know anything about Southern California artists in general, you can always go to VeniceICA.org, which is the Venice Institute of Contemporary Art, and check out stuff and get in touch with us, because we're interested in hearing from folks with ideas. So, is it time to sign off?
Well, yeah. Is there any questions? We didn't give anyone a chance, really. Just unmute yourself.
Laura, does anybody have any questions?
So
Okay.
do you represent Australian artists as well?
Yes. I didn't see who it was from, but
Charles.
oh, hi, Charles. Yes. But that's one of the motivations of doing this, is getting more in touch with. It's a lot of expatriated Australian artists that I work with. A few in Australia, but wanting to get more into it. It's we've had a Southern California focus at the gallery for the last few years, so I want to get back into Australian art.
Yeah, and one of the things we've done that I did in collaboration with the BG Gallery is we brought art from Estonia and we brought art from Japan to the BG Gallery for a show. What was the name of that show? What did we call it? Edge to Edge, or was something like that? I don't remember the name of the show, but when my gallery was in limbo, or I was moving from one gallery to another, Ohm invited me to curate with him a show in his gallery in Santa Monica. And we had art from Japan and art from Estonia, and Ohm always has an international flavor to his shows. And so I think, part of what wonderful about being in Southern California is we are I hate to use a cliche, but it's true. It's a melting pot for cultures from all around the world. And we need to do more expansion. We need to expand our connection to and observation of and focus on outward as opposed to just inward. In terms of bringing people together, you go further out, you bring people closer, kind of a thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so...
Well, thank you. And
okay, thank you very much.
And Tara,
thank you, Charles. That was great. I can't wait to go and have that experience next time I'm in Australia.
Yeah, that slideshow that you put together, Charles, was amazing on those private museums. I'm going to have to digest that. And Tom, thanks for your work. Tara, thanks for your work. And thanks for all of our audience for showing up. Our next one is what? November 11th?
Yes, so we're going to Mexico.
Yeah, we go to Mexico on November 11th, which is probably going to be, Mexico City is kind of the same time zone as ours, so it might be in the middle of the night for some of you, but we would love if you would come visit us in Mexico on November 11th. Depending on what happens in the election, it might get postponed 1 week, but I'm kidding. But we're excited for you to come visit us again on Art World. And thank you for all the people in Australia for helping us out with this, and all the people who are expats and living in the United States or wherever for helping us out. And thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
As they say in Australia, cheers.